Thank you everyone for joining the second CELA webinar of this 2025 series on shade equity for a cool and healthy LA. While you are waiting for this event to begin, please familiarize yourself with some of the features that we'll be using today. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A feature in the panel that you can find at the bottom of your screen. We've already made note of everyone's questions submitted during the registration process, and we expect to have a lot more questions coming in throughout the presentation. So please understand that we will most likely not be able to get to address everyone's questions today, but we will be reading all of the questions and they will be informing us of your priorities and interests in Shade in LA. And additionally, we do also have interpretation services available in Spanish, Korean, and ASL. To access the language interpretation features, you can also find that on the globe on the bottom of your screen. And all you have to do is select the preferred language. If you're listening in Spanish or Korean, please also select the mute original audio to only hear either Spanish or Korean audio only. Also, please feel free to write your questions in your preferred language in the Q&A channel. We will note your questions and we are able to translate them and respond to them later, either in the session or separately elsewhere. So before we begin, we always like to read the land blessing to start by honoring the land, air, and water through the indigenous ancestors. We want to acknowledge the original indigenous residents of this land. Los Angeles was founded on unceded land of the Tongva, Chumash, Tataviam nations, land without borders. By drawing inspiration from indigenous wisdom and the city's diverse cultures and experiences, we seek to create an equitable decision-making approach to achieving climate and heat resilient solutions for the present and future residents of Los Angeles, while paying proper respect to this land and its original stewards. We seek to build reciprocity while prioritizing Indigenous and frontline community resilience, and with all Angelenos today and tomorrow, to respect the land, water, nature, and air that we share to create a livable, resilient Los Angeles for all humans and our animal relatives and their home. So at this time, we are going to begin by introducing Marta Segura, our Chief Heat Officer and Director of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office.
Great. Thank you, Christine. I really appreciate your starting this off, and welcome everyone. I really am excited that there's over 250 of you registered today, and we're so grateful for your response. So let's get started. Shade equity is crucial for Los Angeles because it's the city's most dangerous climate hazard. And extreme heat is LA's most dangerous climate hazard. And not all neighborhoods have equal access to tree cover and shaded spaces. And here's why this matters. The unmitigated heat challenges our livability and mobility in the present and the future. Just think of how people on public transportation risk their health just by waiting at a bus stop if there's no shade, or on their way to work or school while walking and there's no shade. More people die or go to the hospital from extreme heat, but these deaths go mostly unnoticed, and it's why heat is also known as a silent killer. Neighborhoods that are historically well-resourced have more trees and greenery, while lower income areas have large disparities, making them hotter by several degrees. And this has been the case for several reasons, including historical redlining, lack of civic engagement, and lack of investments in these areas. So who's affected most? Heat risk maps for Los Angeles have demonstrated to us that in vulnerable communities, there are higher rates of pre-existing health conditions and also pollution burden. And therefore, when there is extreme heat or extreme weather or ozone layers, those are the communities that are hit the hardest and first, as per CalEnviro Screen 4.0, the UCLA heat risk map, the LA County Climate Vulnerability Assessment, and other tools that we've used to make this determination. And also many studies show us that not only elderly people and young children suffer these risks, but most low-income areas without air conditioning or without safe places to cool down during the day are at higher risks of heat injury and mortality. And staying cool is also an energy burden, and the unhoused are disparately impacted by extreme heat and extreme weather conditions. If we want to really reduce heat injury, we must tackle extreme heat by reshaping communities with shade, vegetation, trees, hydration stations, bus shelters, and shade structures throughout, and address the energy burden of keeping the AC on in these areas. The City of LA stands ready to address the risks of extreme heat to improve public health and safety with a combination of policies, shade structures, tree canopy, and resilience hubs. Today, we are focused on shade in public spaces. Shade structures and trees are both critical to public health and safety and a more livable Los Angeles in the future. So now I want to share with you that it is well known and researched that shade is the most effective tool to reduce the amount of direct sunlight absorbed by surfaces and people, leading to cooler environments and lower risk of heat-related illnesses in public spaces. It's a simple concept, but has been overlooked by many developers, especially in some of the most densely populated areas of the city. We all want to ensure that the city continues to be livable, promotes the use of public transportation, and it's walkable so that our economy continues to thrive while we prioritize public health and safety. And with that, I'd like to introduce our amazing guest panelists. First, I'll introduce Rachel Malerich, the City Forest Officer, our Office for City Forest Officer for our Office of Forest Management within the Board of Public Works at the City of LA. Thanks for joining us, Rachel.
Thanks for having me.
Great. And next, Dr. Edith de Guzman. She's a cooperative extension specialist with the UC Agricultural and Natural Resources and the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation. Dr. de Guzman, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. And then Monica Dean, the Climate and Sustainability Practice Director at USC Dornsife Public Exchange. Welcome, Monica.
Thank you for being
Great. It's exciting to have all of you here and have this fun conversation and very necessary conversation at this point in time. I hope you guys are as excited as I am. But let's start with you, Rachel. As the city's forest officer, why is it important for the city to care for, maintain, and grow LA's urban forests to combat heat?
Yeah, well, I think you set us up perfectly with your introduction and kind of just sharing the vulnerability that our residents face from heat and how that's going to be a growing issue. And we do know that trees can play a really critical role. So trees provide many benefits to us. You know, we're familiar with the fact that they can improve mental and physical health for our residents. They provide habitat value. They provide an infrastructure service. They serve as a piece of the city's infrastructure in areas like improved stormwater capture and addressing urban heat island. But when we talk about cooling, the first thing I think I'm just going to guess, the first thing that you might think about is your experience either being in a public place or walking somewhere. So I might think about on my weekends, sometimes I'm at my kids' sporting events, and whether or not I can find a seat under a tree kind of changes my experience at that event. Whether or not I start, feeling warm or worrying about, having sun exposure and maybe needing to find that sunscreen. So that might be one way that we're thinking about trees impacting our lived experience. But the cool thing about trees is that they cool in three ways, at least. One is through that direct shade that I'm experiencing either walking down the block or in a public park. The other is through the reduction of the amount of heat that's trapped in those hot paved surfaces throughout the city. So it's preventing heat from being in our environment that way. And then trees also transpire, which is a process. The tree is taking up water and then that water evaporates through its leaves, which also can provide a cooling a benefit. So we think of just one way that trees are cooling, but because they're living things growing and shading these areas, they can provide multiple cooling benefits. And that's why urban forestry is really important to me, is I want the lived experience of our residents to be safe and comfortable, as well as beautiful. So those, again, and trees kind of provide all three of those things.
Amazing. And I think we both mentioned the word maintenance and how important that is. Did you want expand on that now, or you want to talk a little bit more about that later?
I'm fine to jump in that now. So when we
Okay.
think about the urban forest, again, it's April, and typically in April, a lot of people get excited about doing things to celebrate Earth Day, and they might want to do something like plant a tree and have that be part of how they celebrate Earth Day, or in the tree world, we're kind of referred to it as Earth Month, because it's like everybody wakes up and wants to join us in having fun with trees. But planting isn't the only activity that we have to include. We have to, we refer to it in our office as the 4 pillars of urban forest management. We can't just plant trees. We also need to be maintaining existing trees, preserving existing trees, and then doing community engagement. And that can include providing information to the public on why trees are important, like the event we're having today, or listening to the community, engaging with them and hearing their priorities and needs when it comes to urban forest. What are the corridors that you feel need to have additional shade added? What are the things you're concerned about regarding trees? That's one of those 4 pillars, is doing that dialogue with the community. The truth is, the best trees that we have for shading are the ones already in the ground. And so it's really important that the city be maintaining those trees, because I'll talk about this. In the forest, if you go into a forested area and there's a bunch of trees, if one of them falls over, it can just decay in place. It falls apart over time on the ground and adds to the ecosystem there. In a city, if a tree falls over, it usually is gonna potentially fall on something, a car, on your driveway. And we want to prevent those kinds of incidents through proper, both maintaining the tree in a way that is clear of, the trucks going down the street to deliver things, the buses that are running down our roads, keeping them clear of those, but also noticing the potential branches or trees that could fail. And doing regular maintenance and inspection allows us to, again, have all the benefits trees provide, and then minimize the risk to the public by getting eyes on the tree by an expert, and making sure that we're taking care of things proactively, because we don't have that luxury that you would have in the forest, where it could fall over and just continue to be part of this natural life cycle.
Exactly. Great. Well, I think that's a really good segue for Dr. de Guzman. Can you tell us about a little bit about the Urban Forest Equity Collective and how it's contributed to advancing shade equity and cooling solutions for Angelenos in the city?
I would love to. And I'm going to remind myself and the rest of us speakers that we have interpreters who are working really quickly with their hands and brains. So I'm going to try to model speaking slowly.
Thank you.
Feel free to bring the hook out if needed, everyone. So yeah, let me tell you about the LA Urban Forest Equity Collective and what we've done over the last few years. I'm going to actually wind the clock back a little bit before we started that. So before we even had that Urban Forest Equity Collective, I co-founded nearly 10 years ago now a group called the Los Angeles Urban Cooling Collaborative. And our research found that increasing tree canopy alongside the reflectiveness of the LA built environment, surfaces like pavements or roofs, if we increased all of that, we could save 25 to 50% of the lives that are currently lost to extreme heat. Now, this matters, as we already heard from you, Martha, that in an average year, heat kills more people than all other weather-related causes combined. And this is mostly among people of color, low-income communities, and the elderly. So in LA, that can mean dozens of lives are lost prematurely during the most intense heat waves. Okay, so our collaborative found that it's a good idea to save lives through trees. We can have more shade from trees, we can save lives, right? So the next step for us was to figure out where those trees should be planted to maximize their life-saving potential, right? Only as we got deeper into that topic, we realized what Rachel realizes every day, that it's easier said than done to plant those trees in neighborhoods, especially the neighborhoods that need it the most. That's because, again, as you've already sort of hinted at, the distribution of urban forests in LA it's not equal, it's not equitable. Under-resourced neighborhoods have fewer trees, and that's due to some of the past discriminatory planning and investment decisions that we're still feeling the legacy of today. So increasing tree canopy in LA, it's difficult inherently. It's also challenging because we have extensive roadways and pavement and And we're in a semi-arid climate that requires watering trees during their first few years. So we were kind of at a crossroads, right? So to help address this, I turned to another Rachel O'Leary, who was at the time the executive director of City Plants, which is the nonprofit that organizes the City of LA's planting activities with several of the tree planting nonprofits, including groups like Tree People and Northeast Trees. And during the pandemic, Rachel O'Leary and I co-founded another group, and that's the group you mentioned, the Los Angeles Urban Forest Equity Collective. And our goal there was to provide specific practical solutions for community members, local groups, and municipal leaders to improve health outcomes of planting. And working with Rachel Mellerich and her office, as well as a robust set of other city partners, nonprofit partners, public benefit and academic partners, including USC Public Exchange, we created a framework that is intended to be replicable regionally, but also beyond LA. And it provides really practical tools to prioritize and plan for the increased presence of trees and shade in urban areas. It also offers decision-making support. We had community engagement strategies that came out of it. And we also created these kind of renderings, kind of evocative renderings that translated the community's vision into something that could really show what the implementation pathways could be for 2 LA neighborhoods, specifically Central Alameda and South LA, and Sylmar in the Northeast San Fernando Valley. And we're super excited that the Office of Forest Management is using that prioritization framework to help identify the neighborhoods that stand to benefit the most from additional cover with trees, right? So I'll see if I can pop a link into the chat for the LA Urban Forest Equity Collective for folks who might be interested in learning more about that.
Amazing. That's everything you said is so exciting, and I'm sure our audience is, because we had a lot of questions. What organization can I join? What coalitions exist? How can I be part of this? And you answered a lot of those questions in your response. And I think you answered all of my questions in your response. So thank you for being so comprehensive. So I guess I'll turn to Monica next. Monica, can you tell us more about USC Trees Initiative and how this contributes to the intersectional efforts of expanding tree shade in LA?
Yeah, so I'm loving this panel and this sequence of panelists because this actually tells the story quite well, which is the USC Urban Trees Initiative was also created around the time of the pandemic in partnership with Rachel's office at the City of LA and building on the great work that Dr. De Guzman and others have been doing. And where we came in was really to pick up from where Edith and the UFEC coalition left off. They identified priority neighborhoods. What are the neighborhoods in Los Angeles that have the biggest disparity in tree canopy and are most vulnerable, right? So really thinking about those combination of heat and health factors in addition to tree canopy. What makes a community a priority for shade? And where USC Urban Trees came in is really thinking about, okay, once we have a neighborhood identified, those neighborhoods are sometimes whole cities. Sometimes they're bigger than a lot of other cities across America. That's still a really hard place to start. And so what we thought about was once you have a neighborhood, where should those trees go? What is a priority location? And so some of our researchers in our Spatial Science Institute started working with community through actually some of these UFEC workshops and hearing where priority locations for tree planting would be for them. And so there were a number of workshops held, and it became quite obvious, actually. It's where people are walking, how you're walking to school, how you're walking to a metro stop. The people who are most vulnerable and would want shade are the people who are out there and trying to navigate the streets. So that really helped narrow down, okay, if I have a tree and I have a limited budget and I can put it in the ground somewhere and I'm in a neighborhood that needs this tree, where should I start? And it's those pedestrian streets. The next piece of research that we picked up and looked at was what kind of tree. It turns out not all trees do the same thing. And in LA, we have a really unique climate. And as mentioned, trees aren't abundant here. We're not in a forested area, right? And so we have to pay a lot of attention to what kind of trees we add. So the tree that's most iconic with Los Angeles, the palm tree, doesn't really add a lot of shade. But other trees, like an oak tree, provides a big canopy, a lot of shade, and a lot of those other benefits that Rachel talked about, whether it's, you know, better air quality or some habitat for birds or other species, right? So you can see why what tree you want to plant matters. And so we actually have a researcher, Dr. Will Barrelson, in our Earth Sciences Institute, who's looking at what kind of tree, what do different trees in Los Angeles do under our current climate, and where should you plant that tree depending on the kind of climatic conditions you want to see. And I want to just give him a shout out because he had a new study come out a few weeks ago that showed exactly how powerful LA trees actually are. LA trees, when they are growing and it's spring and they have all their leaves and everything, are actually absorbing nearly 60% of the pollution in our air. The trees are doing the hard work. And he had the best quote of all times in the LA Times that said, LA trees are kicking ass. And I just completely agree. They are. So that tells you what kind of tree. And so the last question is how? Edith totally nailed it. Some of these neighborhoods are much harder to add trees in over the sidewalk on those routes where you're walking to school or you're walking to a transit stop or work, because there's no room for them. If you're out on the west side in Santa Monica or Beverly Hills, you'll see there's a big area between where you park your car and where the sidewalk is, known as the public right-of-way. That's a lot of room to put a tree in to let it grow. As you move east, as you go into neighborhoods like Boyle Heights, suddenly that disappears and you don't have that anymore. So how do we add trees in this really small space? Well, it means we have to think a little bit differently. And so we've had an incredible architect at USC, Esther Margulies, and another grad student I want to highlight, who's been looking at exactly this. How do we rethink our streets? How do we still accommodate the things we know residents need, like parking, while also adding shade, which is something that benefits both pedestrians, but also I don't want to park my car on a hot asphalt and not have shade over it, right? Like it benefits everyone by adding shade. And so we had another study come out actually just last week by Laura Messier, who's one of our postdoc students on our team. And she was looking at the urban planning policies in Los Angeles. And it turns out we have a lot harder rules to add trees in LA than many other cities in California. And by changing our rules and how we do urban planning, we could actually fit a lot more trees in. And so some of it is we have to just think different. Times have changed and maybe it's time for a little bit of an update. And I will stop.
Great. Well, thank you for pointing that out. We definitely want to be looking at the planning process and how the city can become more efficient at bringing more shade. But I did forget to bring something up to Dr. de Guzman. We had wanted to discuss possibly why, if we're all tree fans, why do we need to talk about shade structures, right?
That is a great question. Yeah, I'm happy to address that.
Great.
So I've worked in the tree world for over 2 decades now. And while I'll always be a tree person and believe that no investment can beat the number of, I guess, livability benefits that trees can provide in urban areas, I'm almost also, like the rest of us here, very honest about the challenges that exist around increasing tree canopy in a city like ours. And so from a heat and public health perspective, the biggest benefit that trees provide is, in fact, shade. Rachel mentioned it's not the only benefit, but the biggest benefit from that perspective, really from that heat perspective, is shade. shade is just the number one kind of slam dunk way to reduce heat burden for people in an outdoor context. And I believe that we really need to have a sort of a paradigm shift, a cultural shift of sorts in LA to start thinking of shade as an incredibly valuable asset that should be prioritized and supported in every way imaginable. We really should think about like units of shade that we can individually be responsible for, you know, adding and caring for. So while we are simultaneously working on raising the tree canopy in the city, we need to also be working on seeing our city differently and to train ourselves to see where shade exists, where shade doesn't exist. And we need to employ every creative avenue to increase shade square foot by square foot. And in some places that may be done through things that are not living. So it could be done through bus shelters, for example. It could be done through shade structures or shade sails or other urban design solutions. And my vision on this is that the ways in which a neighborhood raises its shade cover will also be in the future a way to express each community's unique aesthetic vision and neighborhood vision. So it's not either or, it's yes and. We know that trees are still going to be providing way more benefits in terms of the mental health and physical health and other benefits, but we also know that the time to start raising more, increasing the shade cover is now. It's probably yesterday, to be honest, and so we need to do it in a variety of creative ways.
Definitely agree, and thanks for bringing up the planning and the mapping and the strategies that we need to employ in order to do this strategically, given the fact that, you know, we don't have endless amounts of funding in order to do this right and to protect public health and safety. So actually my next set of questions is around the planning of an urban forest, and I'll turn to Rachel next. Rachel, can you give us a sneak peek of the urban forest management plan and any recommendations from that plan that make it so that trees and shade structures are both important elements of how we bring shade to the city of Los Angeles?
Yeah, so our office, and I guess I didn't do a little introduction of who we are at the beginning. But Office of Forest Management currently sits within the Board of Public Works, and it's myself and one other staff member. We did have 3, now we're down to 2. So we're not when you call my LA 311 with a downed limb or another issue relative to a tree, we're not the operational folks that are going to come out and send a crew, those kinds of things. We're thinking about long-range planning for the urban forest and incorporation of best practices and new research, like the research you've been hearing about today. And so one of our big projects is working on the city's first urban forest management plan. And again, that document is going to be a 50-year document and kind of guiding the city's efforts towards a healthy urban forest that creates a more livable city. And it includes recommendations in all the areas I talked about in my first response, the planting, maintenance, preservation, and engagement. And one of the first things is this really strong emphasis on preserving and maintaining existing trees, that we might slow down in some of our processes to consider an existing tree before removing it when we're doing a new project. Sometimes trees have to be removed either because of health considerations or, you know, other factors that can appear within a project, but encouraging that the trees that we already have that are currently providing shade to residents, that we consider maintaining them in place because of the public health benefit that they provide. Additionally, it's going to be incorporating the findings from the UFEC group and the USC research that have really helped us triage and prioritize where the city's early investment should be going, to again kind of raise the level across our neighborhoods for canopy cover. We're setting a overall city canopy cover target, and then we're also setting a minimum neighborhood level target. Again, this is still need to be, we don't have a draft out for review yet, but these are some of the concepts that we're including, is saying that no neighborhood should be below 15% tree canopy cover. Our current citywide tree canopy cover is around 23%, just shy of 23%, but we see it's largely focused in some neighborhoods and not others. And so we're encouraging the city to say every neighborhood should have a minimum of 15%. So those are some of the things. I'll say that, again, trees are the heavy hitter, but we also know that they take time. That's part of the complexity of my job. Is someone says, well, if I remove this tree, what would it take to replace it? Well, you got to give me a couple of decades, in all honesty. You know, it's not, you can't replace something that is decades old immediately. And so that's why we want to pause on and think very carefully about tree preservation. But then we also know that we need other infrastructure investments in shade while new trees that we might plant to add canopy to neighborhoods come into place. And that it's going to be, like Edith said, a yes, and we have to have more than just trees shading our communities, especially as we have an immediate need for shade that trees are going to help with over time as new trees grow into place and as existing trees grow bigger over time. But we know that we're going to have to use both strategies in order to really meet the need of our residents and in protecting them from extreme heat. And again, part of, in my mind, I don't think we have specific recommendations at this time about built infrastructure, but it's the importance of the collaboration with your team, Marta, as you think about the heat strategies for the city and how we're considering reducing those heat and health risks and having an alignment between our two plans, which is where we've already been focused. You know, how do we communicate with others and support other initiatives the city has, while also including, again, these good practices, good recommendations for the city to be really efficient and thoughtful in when we invest in trees, where we invest in them, and how we maintain them over time.
Great. And I can say, as a former planning commissioner, how many times we had to remind developers that we needed trees that would provide shade in the developments that they were proposing. Lots of them have renderings of palm trees, which maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. de Guzman, but I read palm trees were really a species of grass, not even a species of tree. Yet we've been using them for dozens of years or decades as a tree, and it's really not even a tree. So as a former planning commissioner, I can tell you it's been tough transitioning architects, renderers, designers, developers to get away from that iconic palm tree and present their designs with something that is much more not just public health oriented, but aesthetically pleasing and reduces the energy burden of our city, right? So I want to dig a little bit deeper on that concept, maybe with Dr. de Guzman, on the value of a tree, because we do get these developers who want to just, you know, take down these trees and say, I'm sorry later, and ask for forgiveness and pay the fee, right? How can we convince both developers and others involved in these developments how valuable a tree can be? Rachel mentioned, hey, if that tree has been there for 3 decades or 2 decades or 4 decades, we can't just replace it with another baby tree, right? So can you enlighten us about the value, the economic value of a tree?
Sure. So I think that we've hit on a lot of the benefits of trees so far. We know that it's a variety of benefits that can improve health outcomes as well as quality of life in the city. And, you know, we've already talked about cooling, and we literally see that in neighborhoods that have more tree cover, we see fewer people show up at the ER during heat waves. And this is really critical because our planet is warming. And in LA, that has meant hotter heat waves that occur more frequently and they last longer than they used to. So that has very tangible economic impacts because healthcare is very expensive, right? Not to mention premature deaths. That is a major problem. And by the way, in LA, we can even have wintertime heat waves, which is not a phenomenon that happens everywhere. So this isn't just a summertime thing. We occasionally do have wintertime deaths from heat in Los Angeles.
That's right.
But of course, trees also are proven to do a lot more. I've actually been spending a lot of time in the Palisades fire zone doing an assessment of trees in the public right of way, so the street trees, to see how they fared in some of the areas that got burned. And I can tell you that I can see again and again that likely some of the houses that were saved were probably saved because trees were nearby, or other vegetation that was well irrigated and well maintained was nearby. So This is very preliminary research right now, but we will be coming out with data that will sort of tell the story of what happened there. And I'm seeing again and again that oftentimes houses are burning trees, not the other way around. So that's something else that's becoming very relevant here in Los Angeles. But there are lots of other benefits. So we know that from a health perspective, trees improve respiratory outcomes by reducing pollutants and, of course, providing oxygen. Having more trees around can reduce rates of asthma, for example, which is a very big problem in Los Angeles, particularly in areas that are adjacent to freeways. Trees also provide a lot of reason to enjoy doing physical exercise, to get outdoors and enjoy being outdoors. I mean, I know I'd rather take a walk or a run on a tree-lined street rather than one where I'm surrounded by pavement and under scorching sun, right?
Exactly.
So we know that tree cover is associated with all of that, and that produces lower rates of diabetes and obesity, among other health conditions. Now, there are many other ways that trees improve health outcomes, but I guess I'll just mention one more that briefly also came up earlier, and that's mental health. Trees and access to nature can reduce stress hormones like cortisol, which leads to improved mood and reduced anxiety. And I think we could all use a little bit more of that in these very high stress times. So, hug a tree and you'll be a little happier.
Wow, that's a lot to consider and a lot to assess, right, and research. So my next question is actually for Monica about research and future research opportunities with regards to not just the value of trees, but considering long-term shade equity. But I do think that I'll just say out loud, I have seen a gap in how we place an economic value of trees. And at cities, we don't usually put them in our capital infrastructure budget. We also don't put them in sufficiently in our maintenance budget. That's why we don't normally have 3 to 5 years of watering for a tree in our budget, right? So but if we were able to explain the value of that tree and how much it brings to the city, then maybe we could turn that around, right? Have a paradigm shift in how we value trees as cities. Could you talk to us about the possibility of USC doing some of that research?
We're definitely starting to. So some of the studies that I mentioned earlier, including the one I linked to in the Q&A, it's talking about how we need to think about trees as infrastructure, right? Too often we take for granted trees as these beautiful gifts that they are a part of our city, but they require investment. They require care and maintenance, and especially in a climate that's prone to drought, like that has a real cost to it. And so I would be really curious for Rachel and Edith to weigh in here, but like one of the biggest myths we constantly come across is the public perception of what it costs to plant a tree. There's so many things where you could just, buy a tree in someone's name, gift someone a tree, and it sounds lovely. It does, and I love the intention behind it. But that $20 donation is not the real cost of a tree, right? So there's the permit, the labor that goes into it. But in LA, there's the care and the maintenance and the water. Oh, yes, the water that we have to bring around in a truck in order to help make sure it actually grows to maturity. And that means visiting these trees. And often for a lot of our tree CBOs that do this work in LA, that means 33 visits a year. So the real cost of a tree, and Rachel can jump in here and correct me, is much higher than what people think. And so one of our biggest barriers, I think, to getting trees to be treated as infrastructure is recognizing, just like any other infrastructure, a road or a bridge or whatever, you have to invest in it in order to maintain it. And there's definitely progress in other cities and across the world, actually, in how we start moving nature and the benefits of nature and all of these great things it does onto the balance sheet and how it gets factored into decision making, so that you have to think about whether or not the the house you're building or the apartment building you're constructing has an effect on nature, and how you fund that nature to make sure it stays part of the city's infrastructure.
Great. Well, Rachel, I heard your name invoked a few times by Monica, so I'll let you chime in.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I know that there have been points in our history where, and I think this is still sometimes the case, where a resident can get a street tree added if they're willing to water it. And one of the things that our office did, again, this was a new office created in 2018, and one of the things I did early on was work with our partners who write grants to bring new trees into the city, to ask them to include that watering whenever a grant allows them to, because sometimes grants have limitations on what you can pay for and what the time period that they can cover. But we've heard loud and clear from our residents that providing that water and the ability to restake the trees when the tree stakes, lean and fall over, you don't probably have a stake pounder in your garage, but the crews that do this kind of tree establishment care do, and they can do things like adjust those stakes and ties, provide the direct water. I do think it's wonderful when people plant and water trees themselves, but we know that we don't want that to be a barrier to a new tree growing in and being put in and thriving. And in other parts of the US, they get regular rainfall. And so they might need to provide supplemental water in the summer months when the tree is small. But in LA, we can go sometimes 9 or 10 months without rainfall. And so the tree is really going to struggle at the beginning. And I'll give this example. If you've heard me speak before, you may have heard me already talk about this. We are picking trees that are low water use trees in general. We're not picking a tree that's really like super thirsty. But when a tree is small, it's like, I give the analogy of our children. A baby, you got to hold the bottle for the baby. Then eventually the baby can hold the bottle for itself. And later on, your 7-year-olds maybe going to the fridge and opening the fridge door and pouring a glass of milk for themselves, right? So, but at the beginning, the baby needs total support from the adult to even hold the sustenance. So that's kind of what's happening with our trees at the very beginning, is that their roots are going to grow out and be able to sustain them and be independent. But at the beginning, they need us to provide that direct water while they establish that root system below ground. And that's why we need to provide, again, it's somewhere around 33 visits a year that we recommend that the trees get a deep soak. And I'll just make the other point, again, this isn't a tree care webinar, but I'll just remind us that, let's just say you still have a lawn and you're like, well, my sprinklers go off every day. Grass roots only go a couple inches below the soil. You got just the first couple inches that you need to get wet if you're watering grass. If you're watering a tree, the tree roots go down 18 to 24 inches below, sometimes as much as 36 inches. You need to soak that entire area, which again, we build a little basin that we call a berm. You fill that berm with 15 gallons of water that soaks in, again, once a week during the summer months, maybe more often if it's really hot, but it's not going to get enough from your lawn watering. In fact, that might encourage the wrong kind of root development and growth. We want the roots to not be coming up to the surface looking for water, but actually getting established a full 18 to 24 inches below the surface. So again, I can't help myself when we start talking about trees and their care at the beginning. And I kind of differentiate. There's that establishment care, that's the beginning, getting it off to a good start and helping it get past that like young phase. And then there's the long-term maintenance, where again, we're providing regular inspection to prevent any kind of risk to the public from a large limb that needs to be trimmed, or structurally pruning the tree for its health over time, and making sure it's not obstructing street lights and other things like that that are also important in our public right of way. And so to Monica's point, people need to be investing in all those areas. And there is a bit of sticker shock for folks when they want to plant an urban tree. They don't think it should cost that much, but I think we've made the point that trees provide us all of these value and benefits over their lifespan. I think it's worth that upfront cost, because overall it's much less than we spend on other infrastructure types and other types of maintenance. It's just, we've had kind of a history of not investing enough in these areas, and that's the shift that needs to happen.
Great. And I love your analogy about a baby, because the other thing I was realizing as you were explaining how to take care of a tree is that these are really orphans. They're baby orphans, because normally trees grow in a grove with other trees that are bigger than them. And those bigger trees provide sustenance with their roots. They provide shade and care with their canopies to the smaller trees until they grow big enough, right? So basically their moms are not around to take care of them. So we replace that with providing the extra water.
Nature is magical. There's natural selection. In nature, a tree pops up where there's the resources to support it. It's got that perfect mix of like just enough light, enough soil volume, moisture. And my parents in their backyard are pulling up some volunteer trees that are popping up. And I keep reminding my mom that they're not all going to survive. If she just let them kind of fight it out, maybe only one will, because she's nervous that one will be too close to her home. But in nature, there's this wonderful process. And in the city, unfortunately, we do have to intervene. If we want to have trees in the city, it doesn't, if you let the tree pop up where it's going to be, it might be just, right next to your driveway. And that doesn't work with our built infrastructure. So we do have to intervene with careful planning to put trees in the locations that kind of work with everything else. But it makes it so we are having them starting off needing a little more care to get going, because we can't put them in and let them kind of, again, volunteer, so to speak.
Great. So I'm going to go into the public's questions next, because I think we're getting close to 4:30 here. And I think this one I'll pass over to Monica, and then maybe Dr. de Guzman. How is the city facilitating and reinforcing collaboration? Oh, no, this is for Rachel. Sorry. Collaboration across departments to support shade equity. I thought it was a community collaboration. We're talking about city department collaboration.
Yeah, so I feel really fortunate that in my job I get to help to both lead and help create the vision for the city's future urban forest, again, advised by what we've heard from community groups through processes like the ones done by UFEC and USC, and the community engagement campaign that we did for the development of the UFMP. We went out and did 26 workshops across the city, getting to engage with you in person, having people respond to our questionnaire. So informed definitely by the priorities of our community, but so we have the opportunity to lead with the vision of what the future urban forest is going to look like and what our targets and metrics that we should be tracking are. But we also have this role where we get to advise other departments. And so on projects like Executive Directive 9, that's looking at streamlining and creating efficiencies across city processes, that was put forward by Mayor Bass, it's an opportunity where the mayor's office is convening departments to talk about how we do different capital investments and what we prioritize in those investments. And so we are contributing to that conversation and elevating the need for shade, in particular in the form of trees and urban forest interventions that can improve the public experience, especially where we know we have high pedestrian volumes or areas where we want people using public transit and having shade and cooling along the way. So we're involved in a variety of city policies that are in development and advising. I see my role as saying, hey, this is the way that we can better enhance canopy and urban forest health. And if we are making choices where that isn't the priority because other infrastructure has to come first, that we're aware of that. So the city is informed, if we have to not prioritize shade in a certain area, I've at least flagged that and said, hey, if we design this area in this way, or if we move these things, it's going to make it really hard to have good shade from trees in this space. And sometimes that's a trade-off that happens, and that's going to happen for the city because we have multiple needs. Everybody wants their lights to be on. They want our sewer system to work well. There's a number of factors that people really rely on our utilities and public infrastructure to serve, and trees are one component. But I'm there to provide some technical expertise and to kind of flag some of those trade-offs. And we definitely have really excellent collaboration. The city is large. That's one of the challenges, is 40,000 employees and multiple departments. And so we aren't everywhere at once, but I meet with so many different staff who would like to be making sure that we do the right thing when it comes to trees and shade. And that's where our technical expertise that our office is able to provide can kind of elevate the opportunities that the city could take advantage of first and foremost. I'm grateful that I have a position that this is what I get to work on every day, because I know that there's a lot of areas where we have maybe outdated policies or practices that need to be improved. And unfortunately, some of that change is going to take longer, take some time, but we are in the process of collaborating with the various departments. And again, the city has that need to prioritize, to kind of balance the priorities that our residents expect us to deliver on.
Yeah, I know that when I've spoken to a couple of other departments, they're very grateful that you are leading the charge on planning, because it's just enough work to have to plant the trees and take care of them, and so having somebody who's looking forward and also looking at the policies and seeing what needs to change is a very necessary role in the city. So now I am going to go to the question about how can folks collaborate and advocate for shade equity in their local communities? What are some opportunities? And I guess we'll start with Monica, and then we'll go to Dr. de Guzman, since she's done both as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've found most impressive about Los Angeles, and mind you, I'm a relatively new Angelina, I've been here for 3 years, is just how active the different community-based organizations are that are working on trees. And so my number one first place go stop is go to City Plants, go look at the list of organizations that they're working with, because there's probably a local NGO working in your neighborhood to do tree planting, and they have volunteer events, and they have community events, and they have these great activities, and you can help. Yes, shout out to City Plants in the chat. I think that's a first place to start, is know who's working on this issue in your own neighborhood. The next is those groups will often help connect you to the processes being led by both the city and also the county. And I'm seeing some questions on the county in the chat, who's been a great collaborator too. They've also been working on an urban forest management plan in coordination with the city. And there are many community meetings and events to come tell the city or the county what you think, and that feedback really matters. And having witnessed this process firsthand, like, the city and county are being very responsive, I think, to community concerns. So show up, your voice matters, and make sure it's being heard, but also get involved. And I think the other piece of this that I maybe want to emphasize, going back to the yes and, is that a majority of LA's tree canopy is actually on private property. Over 80% of her tree canopy is on your private property, in front of your house, in your backyard, or maybe it's at a business district, or whatever the case may be. And so this is one of those instances where you can get involved. What you choose to do with your space and how you want to help this problem of increasing the shade canopy is something you can do. And again, shout out to City Plants and many of the other partners that they work with. They have tree giveaways. They will help you get a tree onto your private property. And so I would just say, like, what can you do yourself? And I recognize there's, I think, a question in the chat about best practices and making sure you don't plant the tree in a way that inadvertently causes a problem. And I think that's where experts like Rachel and like others who work in this field really can come in and help advise to make sure that, no, the roots don't grow into the sewer line or upwell your sidewalk. So that's where I would say get involved. There's a lot of opportunity. There's some really great organizations doing good work, including UFEC. So maybe Edith wants to build from there.
Go right ahead, Dr. de Guzman.
Yeah, thank you. So I think you've covered a lot already. So I will echo what you said, but I'll add that I think a couple of other ways that people can get involved is to tell your elected officials that this is a topic that matters to you, and that it matters to fund it, and that it matters to treat living infrastructure in the same way that we treat non-living infrastructure, which means funding it in the same way, thinking about maintenance and thinking about how critical it is to living in the city. So that's one thing. I would also say, talk to your friends and family about this stuff. You are more influential than you think, people. Talk to people, because by virtue of doing that, you are helping to shift that culture that I was talking about. We need to change the way we see the city. We need to train our eyes to see, where is there space? Where is there a lack of shade? Where are there opportunities? Where do I want to see something different? So you can help with that. And one of these days, we will start seeing more investment opportunities on our ballots. And so you're doing the work by getting the word out to your friends and family that this is something that matters, so that when maybe one day we will have a measure T for trees, and we want critical mass to support that kind of a thing. You know, the issue of climate change can feel overwhelming, and we can feel completely powerless against it. But this is a very local, actionable issue that you can dig into, get your hands dirty, and actually make a difference. And it feels really good. You end up getting to know your neighbors, and the type of benefit that comes out of that is way beyond just climate mobilization. It's all sorts of crises that we are now very familiar with, from the pandemic to everything that's happening at the federal level, et cetera. So you really, you know, this is the time to strengthen those bonds with friends, family, and neighbors. And this is a really, you know, critical and tangible issue that you can get engaged around.
Excellent. Thank you. Rachel, did you want to add anything to that about community coalition building or involvement?
I think that has been covered pretty well. I will say that you've heard some really good recommendations. They were on my kind of, list of things to promote for individual action or collective action. Is, again, thinking about, are you in a space where you could plant a private property tree and take advantage of the City Plants program? I may also add into the chat the International Society for Arboriculture, which is the ISA, which is the one that certifies people as certified arborists or municipal urban foresters. They have some really good information on their Trees Are Good website for folks that have trees that they're responsible for on their private property, what you might want to think about and know about taking care of a tree over its lifespan, which may not be the case for you. So either caring for trees well on your own property, planting a new tree if you have space and capacity to do that. And I will echo also what you shared about engaging your council offices and elected officials. I, again, am working on a number of issues with the capacity that our office has with 2 people. And there's a variety of things that need to be fixed. And some of them I'm prioritizing because they're really important. And some of them I'm prioritizing because I see a good opportunity. The city is already moving in a certain area. So I'm going to take advantage of that existing movement and insert some good tree policy in it. An example being the update of the landscape and site design ordinance. That team reached out and said, hey, can you help us make sure that these things we're including relative to trees really match, again, the overall vision. And they included some really excellent policy components around incentivizing the preservation of trees, of providing some good suggestions to folks to prioritize large stature tree species or native tree species when doing development projects, and having a landscape maintenance agreement that goes with the property moving forward, so we can kind of, again, have an agreement of how multifamily buildings are planting or preserving and maintaining trees over time. So those are some of the ways that we prioritize things. But if a council office is hearing from constituents that a certain component of urban forestry is really important to them, or that trees in the urban forest is important overall, that sometimes can change the landscape for me in the work that I do. If you're highlighting that this is a priority to you as a resident, it changes the conversation, especially if many people are chiming in. So, and your council offices want to hear what your priorities are. You're their constituents. And so whether that's, going to one of the many council meetings and providing public comment, or just reaching out to them directly and letting them know your concerns or priorities, it can provide support to the urban forest as a whole.
Great. And that speaks to one of the next questions from the public. What can we do about new developments? How can we ensure developers are adding additional tree canopy properly? And yes, one of the methods is to notify your council members, but I was going to say neighborhood councils as well. And if neighborhood councils create, because I don't know if some of you know this, but these developers go to neighborhood councils first to get their buy-in, so that they can say to the council member, hey, we got the buy-in of the neighborhood councils. And then once the neighborhood councils buy in, that's the public's voice speaking to the council member. But if a criteria of that neighborhood council is to say, we want tree canopy, we want appropriate tree canopy, and this is off of the strategic plans that have been created by UFEG, Rachel Mellerich and Monica Dean, and we've really looked at this and we need these many trees in our neighborhood, then you have an echoing of that voice, a domino of that voice, reverberating not just from you to your council member, but from you to your neighborhood council. And then there's the NCSA, right? The Neighborhood Council Sustainability Alliance, which is like a offshoot of the neighborhood councils, but they deal specifically with sustainability issues and urban forestry issues. So I would engage with them as well. So for the city anyway, that's how you can engage more and have your voice heard more than normal. Does anybody else want to talk to how can we make sure developers know that this is important to us? Planning commission meetings, that's the other thing. You can go to the planning commission meetings, the local planning commission meetings, the citywide planning commission meetings, but also the Board of Public Works. They have meetings Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays now, and they're responsible for the permitting of trees. And Rachel Malorich knows a little bit more about this. What is their oversight over trees at the Board of Public Works, Rachel?
Yeah, so the Board of Public Works will have hearings if more than 2 trees are being removed, street trees. So if you have parkway trees for development projects that are being removed and it's 3 or more trees, those go to a Board of Public Works hearing. And if private property protected tree species are being removed, and again, it's more than 2, if you have 3 or more trees that are part of the city's protected tree ordinance, which is a limited number of species, that also goes to the Board of Public Works for a hearing. I would say that for developers, I agree with you that the Planning Commission is a great place to start, flagging that this is an issue. Again, neighborhood council is another really great option. I will say that the landscape and site design ordinance that was recently passed, it isn't in effect yet, I don't believe. I think that they're going through the final stages of being ready to implement that ordinance, but it did include considerations for trees, for shade in a way that I feel really good about. Again, I think that it's still important for the developer to hear from the community that those are important design decisions that the community wants to see and put some pressure there. But I do feel encouraged that we've had an update to our landscape and site design ordinance that better shows some of those priorities on the city side in terms of preservation of existing trees on the site when developing a new property, as well as this is wild, but I'll say this: before this updated ordinance, there was no requirement for new development to plant street trees. We could ask them to if they had what's called a discretionary case. So if they came in and say, they weren't going to meet our general building standards, that they wanted some modifications allowed to them, we could include street trees as a requirement. But we now have this requirement that if you're a multifamily building, commercial, industrial, when this ordinance takes effect, that you're required to provide a certain number of street trees. And if you can't provide them all on site, that you pay into the guaranteed tree fee so that we can provide additional trees, that number that you can't fit on site based on urban forestry, not based on the developer's decision of whether or not they like the trees there, but based on urban forestry's determination of how many trees can fit there. If you can't fit all the ones you're required to plant, you can pay into the guaranteed tree fee, which will allow for trees to be planted in another part of that council district that's part of a unified project for those funds. But these are requirements that, it's still kind of wild to me that we didn't require it for development, but with the new policy, with the update to our policy, that's what's been included as a requirement for development cases, whether or not they're going for a discretionary case. Anyone that falls under the conditions of that ordinance is going to have to provide some street trees. So again, there's a lot of work still to be done, a lot of improvements to our kind of policies and decision making, and even communication to developers about this being a value of our residents, having shade, having canopy. But I'm excited to share that progress that's been done.
That is exciting.
Yeah,
Super
by
exciting.
the planning department. We just supported it. They took the heavy lift.
That's amazing. That's really great. And does that supersede all the Quimby stuff? Or is the Quimby stuff still kind of out there and not that useful?
I don't know that I can speak to Quimby, and Quimby is more about park investments, correct?
Right.
That's my
Park investments.
So,
They did really have a minimum tree, I guess, quantity. Yeah. It required developers who were building apartments to plant, to create open space. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the open space requirements, and it does have open space requirements between the landscape and site design ordinance. We did have existing requirements for projects to include 1 tree for every 4 units for buildings with more than 6 units. We may be too far into the weeds for our audience, but we did have requirements for developers to include trees if it was multifamily buildings. And if they couldn't fit them on site, then they could put them as street trees. We've just increased and made more mainstream the requirement for street trees, and not removing that private property requirement. There's still a requirement of 1 tree for every 4 units in buildings that have more than 6 units. So we've just added and said, you have to provide street trees too. So that's some of the goal, is that we just continue to say, this is part of the improvements you have to provide if you're building in the public right of way when you do a new development project.
Amazing. So now I'm going to shift over to shade structures. There's a question from the public. I'll hand it over to Edith, but I'll try to answer some of it myself because I am the city. Where will the shade structures be placed in LA? Are any in the Valley or other specific city areas? So for you, Edith, I'll shift it to where should the shade structures be placed in LA? And I'll start by answering that. We have millions of dollars now allocated for bus shelters, and we prioritize bus shelters in areas of highest need. And the Bureau of Street Services for the City of LA is the bureau that, and the Board of Public Works is the city department that's responsible for the implementation and the execution of that. So that plan is going forward. There is a map that we can provide later of where all those bus shelters will go. What I'm not certain of is where, like, the other shade structures, like the rec and park facilities, libraries, playgrounds and things like that, because I know that those will be seeing additional shade structures, especially where we have park improvements. But that's a little harder to say specifically and map at this level of conversation. But I'll turn it over to Edith to talk a little bit more about where you think shade structures should be placed in Los Angeles.
Yeah, so right now we have a variety of tools that tell us where trees are located, etc., but we don't yet have a really good way of telling where shade exists or doesn't exist. But that is about to change. So I want to share a little bit about a tool that's going to be coming out in June that my Luskin Center for Innovation colleague Kelly Turner and her team are working on with a group called American Forests. And it's going to be a shade equity tool. It will be a high resolution shade map for extreme heat mitigation that will make shade data basically accessible, not only for Los Angeles, but for 101 cities across the US.
Amazing.
So that we can know where to prioritize shade in plans and policies, et cetera. So what's cool about it is that, pun possibly intended, is that it will tell us the total amount of shade at noon, 3 p.m., and 6 p.m., and how much is currently produced by trees versus built infrastructure.
Oh, wow.
So then that will tell us where are the shade deserts, where are the places where literally we don't have enough shade. And of course we can, sort of overlay that with activities of different sorts. I think bus stops are a very obvious high need, currently low shade spot, but not the only one. So we have to think about pedestrian corridors, routes to school, etc. So stay tuned for that to be released in June. And if you want to make sure not to miss it, sign up for the Luskin Center for Innovation's newsletter, and we will announce it when it's ready, and it will be publicly accessible. So that I think will help us decide where we need the shade and where to put those structures.
Oh, that's really good to hear. And did you say that schools were included in that? Or is this just public streets?
It shows it is all of the city. So we're going to have this for the entirety of the city. So we'll be able to tell where is there more and less shade? Where do we really need to prioritize? So that will also include areas that that have schools.
Understood. Okay, great. Oh, what amazing information that we've just released at this webinar. Monica, can you address about there's a question here. Let me read the question first and let's see if you can address it. What about starting an Adopt a Tree program like we use with freeways? Do you know of any Adopt a Tree programs for the region, the city, or maybe anybody else here?
Yeah. So there are a lot of Adopt a Tree programs in that you can go to a website like Tree People or Arbor Day Foundation, and you can basically support a tree in honor of someone or an event or something like that. There isn't necessarily an equivalent to an Adopt a Highway where we can put a placard on a tree for any number of reasons. And as usual, Rachel can rattle off all the city reasons why we shouldn't put placards on trees. So it's not quite the same in that way. And the second reason it's different is that for the Adopt a Highway, it actually does cover the costs of highway maintenance and repairs. That kind of logo placement, that name next to a highway, that's a pretty good sponsorship. That's like buying a billboard in many ways, right? And it's a good way to give back. But as I was mentioning before, in many instances, these Adopt a Tree campaigns can be at any value. It's however much you're willing to pay to buy a tree in someone's name or honor or birthday or whatever. And so often what's happening is you aren't paying the real cost of planting, maintaining, and caring for that tree. And so that's that gap that we're trying to overcome here by helping, I guess, bring more attention to the fact that trees cost money. It's not as simple as just a $20 donation in honor of someone's birthday. If you actually want that tree to grow to maturity and provide all those great benefits, you have to invest in it like it's infrastructure, like it's anything else that you have to maintain and take care of.
Great. Maybe we have to change the name of the Adopt a Tree program to Adopt a Tree for all of its life.
Yeah, a lifetime commitment to a tree.
Yeah, and you can do it collectively or on your own.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I should say, there are some great programs like the Tree Ambassador program in LA that a number of groups organize, where it is much more about promoting that lifetime of care and maintenance for trees. So there are a number of initiatives focused on that as well.
Yeah. And I noticed that City Plants does have an Adopt a Tree program. And if you work with City Plants, they can get the permitting, and they work with Rachel and other folks at the city to ensure that, you know, there is some sort of long-term maintenance strategy for that tree. I did speak to the executive director right before this, and he said that they're just about to get some additional funding to begin those programs again. So fingers crossed that that starts soon. So my last question is this. Somebody's asking, are there any initiatives in Southeast LA or even Wilmington or the South Bay that we're aware of for people to get involved or engaged? And I guess I'll start by saying City Plants again. City Plants is very familiar with the efforts in other cities, but I'll turn it over maybe to Edith or Dr. de Guzman to tell me a little bit more about Southeast LA, because I know you've worked in Huntington Park before.
Yeah, so Huntington Park has definitely been a really wonderful sort of example of the great work that's happened. And actually one of the attendees, Christina Basurto, who is a former colleague of mine and Rachel's, is kind of the person that I credit for making that such a bright spot. And she's now at City Plants, which works with the city of Los Angeles. So it does not necessarily work directly with Huntington Park, but Christina, I think, is still has her finger on the pulse of what's happening there. But she's actually an example of how one person's vision can totally transform a community. Christina will probably have to correct me, but I remember that last we talked, it was like 1,600 trees that she succeeded in having planted. So I'm sure it has exceeded that. So there's good work happening there. I know that there were some other gateway cities that were actually quite engaged with work that I started back when I was at Tree People, and it was a collaboration with the Loyola Marymount University Center for Urban Resilience. So they've worked with cities including Linwood in Southeast LA to do assessments on where to prioritize tree planting, and I believe that some of those have actually gotten funded for implementation. So I would check with Loyola Marymount University as well as Tree People to see what the work that's happening there. And then a little further west, there's really great investments that are happening in other parts of South Los Angeles. There's a transformative climate communities grant that was received that is absolutely transforming that whole area. There's the rail to rail project that's happening as well, that is transforming one of the former train sort of right of ways. And so there's really good activity happening down there. And I don't know, Rachel, you might know more, or Monica might have something to add.
I think the main thing I'll add, and I'm not seeing a clear link to invite people to volunteer now, but I do know that the mayor has started having Service Day LA events. There was one in March and there was one in December, and I know that they have one coming up at the end of this month where they're really encouraging people to get out and do a variety of activities across the city, whether it be related to trees specifically, but cleanup activities and other options for people to be contributing to the places that we live and making them beautiful and having that community connection of service. And I'm not familiar with specific projects off the top of my head in Wilmington and Harbor City area, but again, any of the nonprofit partners that do tree planting activities, you have Tree People, Northeast Trees, Los Angeles Beautification Team, Koreatown Youth and Community Center. I know, again, City Plants is kind of the hub for those groups. They meet on a regular basis and kind of coordinate work together. But they provide tremendous services to the city in terms of volunteer opportunities and delivering the DWP Energy Efficiency Free Trees program, which again is street trees in some cases, and then also the up to 7 free trees that you can get for your home, either at an event or delivered to your property. You can sit in your pajamas and pick out a tree on their website and have it delivered to your home, up to 7 of them.
Great. Awesome. Now, I just want to read a little bit about the questions that we have in the Q&A. I don't have a chance to read all of them, but I'll read 2. One says, visionary ideas for the coming super shade structures and systems include upscale design, manufacture, and wide deployment of modular systems such as matrices and clusters of inflatable, deflatables, and expandable, minimalizable balloons, and etc. So I think that that's floating shades is another concept. Large shade sails blankets that are suspended by automated drone fleets. So we definitely have some visionary people in our audience. And then another question here is, how can CEMO, the Community Forest Advisory Committee, LA neighborhood councils, stakeholders, urban forest management, all work together and collaboratively on planting and maintaining trees? Great question. We will definitely get back to you on that one. What about what about starting an adopt a tree program? Anyway, these are really wonderful questions. I promise I will read them all and we will get to them all. And I'm excited that you're all excited about how we move this forward, particularly, and I haven't said this before, because we have some big events coming to Los Angeles, and we want to make sure that those big events are ready for all the Angelinos that will be attending, and also all the tourists that will be attending these major events. We want to keep them safe, and we want 0 heat injuries for sure. So that's top of mind for all of us here at the City of Los Angeles. So now I think I want to thank all of you for the super insightful and also strategic and methodical solutions and insight that you've provided. It was a really thoughtful conversation I learned a lot. I learned a great deal. I'm sure our audience did as well. But we're almost at the end here. We've done the Q&A, and what I wanted to end with is your calls to action. Like, now that we've had this amazing discussion, what would you like the members of the audience to prioritize as we move forward? I'm going to say it, the elephant in the room in this era where at the federal level, perhaps climate is not being prioritized, but at the local level, we still have an opportunity, particularly because the climate bond was already passed at the state of California. And as Dr. de Guzman mentioned, we have measures that we have passed locally in Los Angeles that support this kind of work. We have the benefit of continuing to plan and dream and envision changes for the local level. So let's start with Dr. de Guzman, and we'll move over to Monica and then to Rachel.
All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this. And this is just fun hangout time for Monica and Rachel and me. We work together very closely, and it's just nice to actually get to chat about the work in this informal kind of way. So my call to action is a fun one. My call to action is for everybody to mark their calendars and come out and engage with this topic through art and action-oriented activities coming to Descanso Gardens, which is, for those of you who don't know, LA County's beautiful botanic gardens located in La Cañada, Flint Ridge. So this summer, there's going to be a series of programming that I'm co-curating with my husband. It's called Roots of Cool, a celebration of trees and shade in a warming world. A quick shout out to some of the artists who are on the call right now. They're in the webinar. We've got Sydney Hart and Sarita Zaleha and Shoshana Ben-Horeen. I think those are the three that are here. So they're some of our artists. We will have an opportunity to have people just get immersed in this topic of shade equity in a few different ways. The show runs from July 12th to October 12th. And we will have a big event on August 2nd. So mark your calendar for August 2nd. We will have lots of fun educational engagement activities for the whole family, and you will feel like you're part of a movement. That is our hope. So that's my call to action. Track Descanso Gardens communications.
Amazing.
They're going to start putting that out there. Roots of Cool this summer.
We'll put that on our newsletters and media too. Thank you. All right, Monica.
Yeah, echoing Edith's comment, thank you so much for organizing. It's been a lot of fun. My call to action is, as you are all now going to go and get involved, is to go push for quality, not quantity. So something we didn't talk about here, but there have been a lot of past efforts, 1 million trees, 90,000 trees, right? That it's always been about the number, not the shade it provides. And so as you go out and become a tree ambassador or participate in these planting events, think about the quality of the shade that we're getting. Make sure it's that right tree in the right place and not just, I did X number of trees.
Great. Thank you so much for reminding us of that. Rachel.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Monica. I sometimes I'm tempted to tell reporters when they call and ask about various things that they're asking the wrong questions, because it isn't about the number, it's about the impact to our residents, which goes back to how much shade and cooling is available, how healthy those trees are, how well we're maintaining them, whether or not we're keeping them for their full lifespan. So I've shared my call to action, which is tell your elected officials what you care about when it comes to trees. I think I really, again, I echo the appreciation. This, I think, gives the public a chance to kind of see the collaboration with the university side that we have going on at the city, as well as the collaboration across teams, because Marta and I run different offices, but we know that our work is connected and that it's really important for us to dialogue and share, her office is thinking about heat and the climate emergency. Our office is thinking about one component of the solutions, and the ability to collaborate is just critical to, reaching the vision for the future livable city that we want. And my call to action, aside from the council office, I do want to put the first one that came to mind for me is that I take some time to look at a tree. Pick one in your park, one in front of your home. I just am refreshed when I look up and see the structure of a tree and know that this plant took sunlight and water and nutrients in the soil and then has created this really interesting and dynamic masterpiece that we get to be underneath or around. And that's I talk a lot about like, how are we, taking care of this public infrastructure and maintaining it in the right way. But the real thing that draws me to this work in the first place is this opportunity for wonder and that connection with how magical the world we live in is, that it has these systems that grow and evolve on their own. So that's my invitation to you this April.
Well, I can't top that. Let's end with that vision of a magical tree and looking up at all of the branches and how it connects to the sky. And I guess I just want to echo all of the calls to action of our guest panelists here. But maybe I'll add just a little. When you ask for a tree, make sure you tell people why trees are important to you, why they matter. And I think that that message will be heard and listened to a lot longer than just that day, because people will remember how the tree has made you feel. So thanks, everyone. Thanks to my team as well. Christine, Rebecca, Amy Clark, all of you have been phenomenal in helping us prepare for this day. And thanks to the audience as well. And all of the tree experts out there in the audience that were excited to join us at this webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and hope to see you all soon at some of these events that are coming up. Very inspiring. Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Thank
rest
you
of
so
your
much,
evening.
everybody.
Take care.